The Odd Chance. Dear friends, The Odd Chance, by Hugh is a gripping hunting story that unfolds in the dense jungles of India. The story explores the nature, the delicate balance of the ecosystem, or the thrill of witnessing a predator-on-predator encounter in the wild. Let's listen this story in the words of Hugh. Some years ago when I was showing a friend round our jungles, he suddenly turned to me and asked why I had come out with only a walking stick. In a place like this, isn't there every chance of meeting a tiger? He added. I did not think he really believed me when I told him that the chances of meeting a tiger were practically nil and that it was possible to walk through the jungles every day for years without ever seeing one. But he persisted, what would you do now without a rifle if one suddenly came charging towards us? I was not able to convince him. Nor was I really surprised that I could not. The idea that a tiger is always a dangerous animal and liable to attack on sight is one shared by nearly everyone unfamiliar with the jungles. In fact, however, the tiger is very seldom dangerous until provoked and in its normal state does not molest man. Indeed, the tiger wants so little to do with man that it will always stay out of his sight if it possibly can. Yet, in a way, that friend of mine was right. The odd chance does occasionally turn up and you meet a tiger bent on mischief even though it has not been provoked in the ordinary way. But just how rare that chance really is may be gauged from my own experience. For more than 10 years I have walked through the jungles every day and that odd chance for me has turned up just once. It was on a stifling evening at the end of our first hot weather. Tea had been over about an hour and I was sitting on the veranda when Babs reminded me that the meat in the larder was low. Almost as she spoke I heard peafowl calling from the direction of Stony Ford, a crossing over a nullah some quarter of a mile away. A few minutes later I had left the house with a 1-2 bore and a pocket full of cartridges. As I set off towards the sound of the calling birds, angry black clouds were building up above the distant hills, the rains were due to break at any moment. I was making for a strip of scrub jungle that fringes the bank of a large nullah. In there, if the peafowl eluded me, I might later put up some pig or come across a barking deer or a cheetal stag. Through this jungle runs a smaller nullah that joins the larger one. This is about 10 feet wide and some 6 deep and I dropped down to its sandy bed when I reached it. The banks are lined with many kinds of jungle trees. That day some of these were already in full leaf, while others were performing that yearly miracle of producing delicate little leaves and buds from a rock-like soil seemingly devoid of a drop of moisture. Peafowl are difficult to surprise, but a stalk along the sandy bed of the nullah could be made in silence. A little farther down I hoped to find some of the birds feeding and get a shot before they could fly out of range. I started to creep forward and kept going for about 10 minutes. Then, while edging round a bend, I was suddenly stopped dead. Just in front of me, and apparently asleep under a patch of shade, was a large leopard stretched on the sand. But there was something wrong. A closer look showed that its attitude was unnatural. The head was twisted grotesquely, and one forepaw was slightly bent and held drunkenly in the air. The leopard was dead. As I started to approach it, my nose told me that it had been dead for some time. A swarm of blue flies buzzed up as I came nearer and wafted the sickly sweet smell of death more strongly to my nostrils. Something had eaten a small part of the hindquarters and the sand all around the leopard was wildly churned. The sand was too dry to show what animal had been feeding. I began to look around me and almost at once spotted something else. A little farther down the nullah, hard against one bank, were the remains of what had once been a cheetal stag. All that was left now was the head, a few pieces of skin and splintered bone, and 2 almost whole ribs. Both animals had been dead for about 2 days, and I was beginning to wonder what had happened when I noticed that a small forest tree had fallen across the nullah some 10 yards farther down. It was blocking the nullah completely, but starting not far in front of it I could see in the sand the mark of a drag which disappeared into the foliage of the fallen tree. Something heavy had been dragged through to the other side. I went up to the tree and, after tearing away some of the leaves and smaller branches, saw something black lying within 2 yards of me. It was the dead body of a huge wild boar. I climbed over the tree and looked down at it. The mask was set in a ferocious snarl, and the one tush I could see was stained brown with congealed blood. The remains were fresh, the meat hardly tainted, but the body of the boar had been horribly ripped and torn, and once again a little had been eaten off the hindquarters. This was the work of a tiger, and if that blood-stained tush meant what I thought it did, the tiger had not had the fight all his own way. As I got up from examining the boar, I suddenly realized that the jungle around me was strangely quiet. I looked up at the trees for vultures, and found not a single one in sight. The truth came to me the next second. Somewhere very close at hand, the tiger was lying up. The dead leopard was lying pretty much in the open. That was the only explanation for no vultures. It was now just 6 o'clock and a little darker than usual. The black clouds I had noticed when leaving the house had crept up overhead, and muffled thunder was vibrating in the stifling air. All at once I made for the bank and climbed quickly out of the nullah. Its sandy bed now was an unhealthy spot, for this was a likely time for the tiger to return for a feed. Once at the top of the bank, I moved to a clump of saplings and stood listening. The jungle here was still scrub, but very thick. The previous year it had been cut over, and now, with the amazing rapidity with which the forests revive, the old stumps had sent up several shoots to a height of many feet. Visibility in any direction was only a few yards. As I stood on the bank listening, I was a little uneasy. To be so near the kills at a time when the tiger might come back to feed was asking for trouble, and I should have liked to know if it had already either seen or heard me. I was still thinking about that when, without the slightest warning, the tiger appeared about 5 yards in front of me. It came from behind a small cluster of teak, like a conjurer's illusion. At first it did not see me, for it was moving obliquely away, but I must have given some slight start of surprise, which caused it to stop and turn. I saw then that it was a tigress, and she was looking straight at me. I can still see those eyes even today, but why I remember them so clearly is not because they held the threat of sudden death, but because they were vacant and not seeing me at all. I might have been some usual piece of jungle scenery, and when the tigress had gazed for several seconds she turned calmly away and then passed out of sight behind some cover. As she went I saw that she was plastered with dried mud, and along her left flank ran a long, bloody gash, and she was moving with a marked limp. To this day, I cannot understand why that tigress's sudden arrival caused me so much surprise. She so obviously had to be somewhere close. Yet when she came I was caught completely off my guard and made no effort to bring her down. As she moved away an easier target could hardly have been imagined. It was the sort of chance sportsmen often dream of, but so seldom get in reality. Perhaps, though, that little jungle god who looks after fools was tapping on my shoulder, for had I fired instinctively it might well have been, for 2 reasons, the last trigger I ever squeezed. The moment after the tigress disappeared from sight I recovered my wits. It had been an odd encounter, and there was much I still did not understand, but there was no doubt that she was a badly crippled animal, and if I was quick, there was still a good chance to put her out of her pain. After the blistering heat of the day, she should now be making for water. She had certainly gone in the right direction. There was a pool in a larger nullah about 50 yards away. If I could surprise her there, she would be a sitting shot from the bank above it. I gave her a minute's start and then followed. About 20 yards from where I was standing there is a little clear ing among the trees. On the other side of it the ground rises steeply and is covered with bushes and small trees. When I came into this I stopped and looked around. There was no sign of the tigress. I was about to go on when I glanced down at my weapon. The next second I got a nasty shock when I realized that, aided and abetted by my bad memory, I had been acting like a lunatic ever since finding that butcher's shop in the small nullah. In the excitement of the moment I had forgotten 2 things, one that I was carrying a shotgun, and the other that it was loaded in the left barrel with number 6 and with buckshot in the right. However, it was a mistake easily rectified, even though I am never happy with a shotgun against a tiger. In the handful of cartridges I had brought out there was 1 lethal ball. I broke the gun and took out the number 6 and then fished about in my pocket until I found the case I wanted. The tigress's roar seemed to burst in my ear. Then I heard her crashing towards me from the high ground a little to my right. The next second she hurtled into view and with a mighty bound landed in the clearing some 30 paces in front of me. The shock and surprise were so complete that the ball cartridge fell from my fingers as I was putting it in the breech. I know now that this mishap undoubtedly saved my life, For if the gun had been loaded, I should have used it at once and before I'd had time to appreciate the situation. It took me perhaps 15 seconds to realize that the animal before me now was not the tigress, but a tiger. That he was bent on mischief, there was no doubt. The moment he landed on his feet, he whipped about to face me, and then began weaving quickly from side to side across my front. At the same time, he was throwing up his head and shattering the air, with bellowing roars. Then he began to make quick, feint attacks. He'd dart in crouching low to the ground with his hindquarters slightly raised and ears laid hard against his head. All at once he would check with his lips, mouthing a vicious snarl that spat out between gleaming fangs. The next second, he would break his feint with a great sideways leap to start weaving and roaring again. At any second that tiger was coming in. He was playing like a cat with a mouse, and the real attack could not be delayed long. Each time he threatened, my eyes went to the end of his tail. The moment that flickered, he would spring. All this time I had been creeping slowly backwards, fascinated by that prancing yellow body. The shotgun still hung open over my left arm. Should I suddenly snap it shut and try for his head with the buckshot in the right barrel? Before I could make up my mind, I saw something that ruled this idea right out. From the corner of my eye, I had spotted the tigress. She was under a small tree, just a few yards to my right, sitting up like a big cat before a fire. On her face was a pleased smile as she watched the scene before her. When I found her so close, I suddenly knew what was really going on. These two were mating. That would explain her extraordinary behavior earlier when she had ignored me so near the kills, for it is not uncommon when the female's in season to find her going about in a kind of dazed, ecstatic trance. After that diversion, for the fraction of a second my eyes snapped back to the tiger. There was no ecstatic trance about him. He was right out for business and getting more excited every moment. This encounter was just what he wanted, a chance to show off before his sweetheart, and if that charnel house in the nullah was anything to go by, this tiger had had some practice. I was still moving slowly backwards when something prodded me in the small of the back. I whipped round to find that it was a small tree. I had reached the limit of the clearing. Very carefully I edged round the slender trunk. At least it was a stick of cover, but even as I got behind it I knew that the game could not go on much longer. The tiger must come in now. He knew as well as I did that behind me lay the jungle and the safety of the trees. Help came from the most unexpected quarter. A thin tongue of lightning flickered down in a brilliant violent flash. Hard on it came a deafening crash of thunder from right overhead. It stopped the tiger dead in his tracks. Then came the rain. At first, just a few large drops spattered against my hat and bare arms. Then, to another crash of thunder, a deluge roared down from the leaden sky. A solid sheet of water was suddenly cascading before my eyes, and soon splashing up from the ground in a fine mist. Quickly taking advantage of this heaven-sent diversion, I moved farther behind my tree. But the tiger had given up. As the rain rattled and bounced off his streaming back, it seemed as though all the ardor had soaked right out of him. Watching him closely, I put another buckshot cartridge in the empty chamber and then slowly closed the gun. As it snicked shut, I slipped off the safety catch. But the game was over. With a great shake of his rain-soaked body, the tiger suddenly wheeled about and then trotted away. Almost at once he was joined by the tigress. The last I saw of them, they were bounding away together towards some broken land where they probably found shelter in a cave. That was undoubtedly my lucky day for several reasons. Firstly, if I had met the tiger instead of the tigress near the small nullah, I do not think he would have hesitated for a single second. He would have come for me at once, because I was far too near his kills, and a tiger's temper is always short whenever he is mixed up with a tigress. The tiger, of course, had killed that leopard. As I see it, the tiger must have surprised the leopard soon after the leopard had killed that cheetal stag. But the leopard, and some are very bold, must have refused to give way over his own kill. Then the tiger went for him, not so much for the possession of the carcass, but to show off to his mate. The tiger had attacked the boar too, but it is not unlikely that the boar proved such a tough antagonist that the tigress had waded in to help. In the fracas she got that long gash down her side. The two reasons that might have proved fatal if I had shot at the tigress, Nothing is more certain than the fact that I should have given her the choke barrel if I had fired the moment she appeared. That would have been enough to bring her straight at me. After that, from such close quarters, I doubt whether I should have killed her with a single charge of buckshot in time. But even if I had, there was still the tiger, about which I still knew nothing. I don't think I would have got away a second time if he had caught me unawares bending over the dead body of his lady love. Friends, I will come with next such an interesting and thrilling stories. Till then, be happy and take care. Please also like and subscribe my channel.